Hello and welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. My name is Zach Kazan. I'm the managing editor at Worn and Wound. I'm joined today by two guests. We've got Kat Shoulders calling in from the Nashville, Tennessee area. Kat, how's it going?
Great. I'm happy to be here.
Great to have you, as always. We've also got Zach Weiss on the podcast, co-founder of Worn and Wound. Zach, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Hanging in there.
I like the term calling in. It's very nice.
Yeah, it feels like a radio show, you know?
Yeah,
it feels like an old, like AM radio talk show. That's kind of the vibe we're going for today. Although listeners can't call in on this format, which is
someday.
Yeah, someday. We're working towards that, I think.
Yeah.
I think. We've got a good show today. We're loosely calling this episode "What the Hell Ever Happened to Budget Watches?" Something we've been talking about. Amongst ourselves and with other collectors for a while now. I think like the price of watches is really on everyone's mind. I wrote an article about some new Seikos that I think kind of struck a chord. And we've seen a couple other kind of pieces of, like editorial around the watch world, sort of like discussing this topic. So we thought it'd be good to talk about on a podcast as well. So that's what we're going to do today. Before that, though, we always do a wrist check. Kat, what are you wearing? Is it a budget watch?
Oh man,
no, it's not.
Not at all.
Wow. Maybe this is what happened to budget watches. Is we all just stop wearing them.
This is not planned. I'm wearing my Rolex Sea Dweller today.
Okay, Kat is we got the problem right here.
Yeah.
Shoulders.
Sorry.
That's the what reference is that? It's the 5-digit reference, right? From the
it's like
2000s?
116600. I can't remember. I'm very dyslexic when it comes to the reference number on this one.
Yeah, that's
somewhere
a good one
along those lines. Yeah,
I do like the Sea Dweller. That's it's a cool watch. Not a budget watch, but
not a budget watch. No,
still a fun one in any case. Zach, how about you? What are you wearing today?
Budget is relative, right?
Budget is relative. That's something we'll talk about.
This is budget relative to certain watches that have come out lately, but it itself is not budget. This is the Habring Joseph, my newest acquisition, if you will. Yes,
finally, it's not me. I didn't add a watch. Zach added a watch.
It's true. I did it. So it's a budget watch for a regulator with a dead stop seconds.
Sure.
An in-house movement. There you go, from Austria.
Yep, that's fair. I mean, there's a value there. I think that is quite clear. I don't know if I would call it a budget watch
it's not a budget
necessarily.
Watch.
Smart choice, though.
It was
a beautiful watch.
all of
Congratulations.
It was all your budget.
It's like the entirety of a budget. Yeah. That's very cool. I saw you posted a photograph or two of that on Instagram over the weekend. Looks great. Very excited to see you continue to photograph it and continue to wear it and hear your thoughts on it. So congratulations on the new acquisition. Budget or not.
Budget or not.
I think I'm the only one who really understood the assignment here. I'm wearing my Seiko Orange Monster.
There you go.
One of my favorite old Seiko references. This one is from maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. I don't know the reference. I'll find it and put it in the show notes. But it's the Seiko Orange Monster with the black bezel. I'm wearing it on a rubber strap, so it's not as like some of the monsters are big, like have this like big chunk of metal quality if you like put them on the bracelet, and this one's a little bit more like discreet and less heavy for sure, because that bracelet's a big kind of monster thing.
What is the bezel made out of on those?
I believe it's just a good question. I don't know. It's not like an expensive premium feeling material, I would say.
Aren't those just like straight up metal milled with black fill in it?
Yeah, I don't know if it's.
I don't know. There's like
it's probably like it's
okay.
It's probably stamped, I would imagine. But it's like a thin piece of, maybe it's like aluminum or steel. I honestly can't tell you. But,
funny that you are wearing that. I mean, obviously relevant to this, but then I wrote an article today, and like I was trying to put together why this watch I was writing about, and I don't know if this watch will be out by the time this airs, so I'm just hedging my bets here to not break embargo. But it was like something about it reminded me of like watches 10-ish years ago, and it was like it's because it looked kind of, it's got this Seiko monster like I'm just a diver kind of attitude, You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just a
It's
diver.
also is all orange. So that also, but it was just twice in one day. Wow. Orange
Yeah.
Monster. It's back.
Yeah.
Listen, the power of the Orange Monster cannot be denied. It's a watch
No.
that I keep coming back to years after first discovering it, and I've written about it and talked about it before. But it's one of those watches that kind of like, I think, sort of like created me as an enthusiast. You know, it sort
Yeah.
of like got me into the
Yeah.
the culture that we sort of live in this hobby. So I don't wear this a whole lot. I bought this from a buddy of mine in the Boston Red Bar group, and it frankly like doesn't keep very good time. But it's like a fun
cool.
summer watch.
How's that bezel alignment? You know?
Bezel alignment's good. You know, no complaints there.
Okay.
I've actually I don't think I've ever actually had a Seiko, like a cheap Seiko diver, quote unquote, that had like a bad bezel. I've always kind of felt like that. That was maybe a little overblown.
I once had an argument with somebody on Instagram because I put up a Seiko diver. I'm sure the bezel's fine. And they're like, it's off. I can't believe it. I was just like, that's like the parallax error. They're like, I know what parallax is. It's not. I was like, I have it in my hands.
Yeah.
I'm
looking at it right now.
Yeah. They're not all have this issue.
Same. I haven't really had any that have been like, I don't know, enough off for me to notice at least.
Yeah. It's I don't know. People love to have something to nitpick, I think. And that can be a contributing factor into why some of these watches are not as don't have the same kind of like place in the hobby that they used to. So I guess to get into the discussion, you know, we can, I'll put the link in the show notes, but I wrote an article about this new line. It's like maybe a month or so old now, of Seiko 5 watches that use SKX as like the branding on the watch. Like they're called like the SKX series of Seiko 5s, which is like a subline within Seiko 5. It's not new. They've had a couple of these releases before. But these ones like specifically are like sized and designed to really look like the classic like SKX 007, SKX 009 series watches. And just kind of like reading about them and noticing that they weren't covered very heavily, you know, among watch media websites, it just got me thinking about Seiko's place in the watch world right now, more broadly, and how there's this like real void, or Seiko left a void in this sort of like under $500 sort of like area that they really owned for a long period of time. So I wrote about that, and you know, it sort of started other conversations about you know, like budget watches in general and how the prices are just like creeping up and creeping up. So I thought we could kind of like discuss those topics you know, today, and sort of maybe see how we got to this place and where we're going from here. I wanted to kind of start off the conversation by asking Zach, since you've Warden One has been there, like very much so, from like, you know, sort of like, I guess like the glory days of, you know, like the Seiko SKX 007 and 009 and et cetera, enthusiasm. Can you talk a little bit about like the importance of those watches and other watches like them to Worn and Wound and the community when the website started? Because it seems to me things have like changed dramatically since then. So I think we should set the stage with like what things were like in the before times, if we can.
Yeah, the before times. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I mean, they're the original like affordable cult-ish enthusiast watches. You know, I mean, just like when we started Worn and Wound, like micro brands hadn't really popped up yet. There were a couple like, you know, Helsons of the world and these kind of like very niche dive watch brands, but like everyone wanted Seikos. The Seiko Monster like was like a watch that was constantly talked about on forums and like fought over and whatever, and like, and everyone had a 007. Oddly, I never had a 007, but like there were like the watch everybody had. I got kind of more into weird Seiko 5s and things, like the SNK was my route, and then I had the I don't know the reference number, but the one that like people would mod to look like a 50 fathoms back in the day, which was like a big, that was such a thing. And now, you know, whatever. But like they actually made there's a Seiko 5 that looks like that as well. Like now, one of these newer models. But yeah, they were like, they just were the affordable watch you wanted to have. And they were fun, and they were like kind of everything that I feel like at least Worn and Wound we were kind of into. They were unpretentious. They were just, you know, readily available. And they were good too. You know what I mean? Or like good enough kind of a thing. It's like we weren't like really spec battling over them. And so, yeah, I mean, they kind of were the culture. And then like as micro brands came in, obviously there was more competition, but it took, I think, a really long time to get to this point where suddenly it's like, wow, where did they go?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's been a long time since those old Seiko 5s too, like the SNK Field Watch, like there was some weird, like, were those really Seiko? I mean, they were really Seiko, but there was a weird, almost like gray area as to how those watches existed. And there was tons of them. It wasn't just those SNKs. There were weird dress watches, and like Amazon was littered with these strange Seiko 5s that were like, who made this? Where'd this come out from? You know, but
I one of my first sub $500 watches that I bought when I sort of got into the hobby. Zach, your SNK article review was like one of the first like things that pushed me to pick up. I picked up the same like cream dial one, and then kind of modded it myself. But I think those were your article, I think, quotes it being $69, and that was back in 2011. And I know I paid under $100 for mine. And bought several of them. I think I had 2 or 3 colors at once. And I mean, there were other brands certainly that had watches under $500 or $300, but Seiko just like really took the lot. I think I had an Alpinist that I think I paid $275. I think at the time for. No, those watches are like 700 something now. It is pretty crazy. And I was just like looking at Amazon earlier, and I just typed in Seiko SNK, and there's really nothing under like $230, I think, from Seiko right now on Amazon, which is quite a difference from $69 and buying a little mechanical watch for that. And I think if you're going to spend that much, now you have the scene of micro brands, and what stops you from just buying like a Brew, which I think would be like, if I was starting now, I would 100% buy a Brew over a Seiko, like 100%. But at the time, there wasn't as many micro brands when I first started. And so really Seiko was just kind of the gateway. Hamilton was still there. I had a Tissot. What are those called? Like Le Local? Le something.
Yeah, it's like,
I had like the dress watch, which it was very beautiful, I think, for like $300.
Oh God, what was that Tissot? It had started, like, the name started with V, I think.
Visodate.
The Visodate.
That was another one. Popular. I had one of those.
Yeah, that was another like very popular. Like, I think of these watches as like forum watches that were just constantly discussed, constantly recommended on forums. And I think, like the sort of like the forums still exist, but they're not nearly as powerful as they were before the rise of Instagram. And I think that kind of like plays a role in this too, is that, in kind of shifting what people are looking at, is people just have like a much, like kind of wider array of things that they're served, now than even like the most expansive of forums, which, had like subforums dedicated to specific brands that would get a lot of traffic, and like, you'd see like the posts on Seiko and Tissot and these other brands kind of like rise to the top. And there's just a lot more variance now with everything on social media. So I think that, something else, Zach, that is important to note is that like these Seiko watches and Seiko coverage, like really is important to the website, like not just Worn and Wound, but like, it drove traffic, on forums and other websites, I'm sure too. And that's something that like I've really noticed. I've been writing for Worn and Wound since, 2019. I started as a freelancer, and, it's 2025 now. So I'm 6 years in, and like, the Seiko stuff is just like not as it's not as much of a necessity as it was like in what were my early days. Like we used to cover like virtually every Seiko release, and for a bunch of reasons, like it's harder to do that now because of like Seiko's nature as a company, and also other competing releases and limited space on the website. But like Seiko posts, frankly, just like don't have the impact that they did, before. And that's just the fact of the changing nature of the internet, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, we used to kind of joke, but like Seiko was our Rolex kind of a thing for a while, whereas like Rolex was the kind of guaranteed clickbait for other websites. And like, we kind of always felt it's pretty easy to just say you like the thing that everyone likes, and like that make that your you're calling, and for us it was like, no, let's go for the thing that people are kind of shunning, because
Mhm.
the other thing about Seiko, and I think this is part of where this all might come from, though, is that they've really fought against the notion that they are inexpensive or cheap watches, right?
Mhm.
And I think the market was sort of flooded with these cheaper versions and, you know, kind of base level Seikos. Like, I think there's lines of Seikos they just don't even make anymore that were kind of like sold at JCK and would be in like, you know, counters, you know, like countertop displays or something at like pharmacies. Like, that stuff kind of gone. And I think the older Seiko 5 stuff was sort of part of that, because that would hurt. It hurt Grand Seiko, you know, it hurt, and the prospects and all that stuff. So, you know, I think that they've intentionally tried to get away from that and get away from that stigma, which still is around a little bit, I think, to some people. But in doing so, like, they've moved into a very strange territory, maybe like, lost the, I don't know, the charm of like what those specific like $200 to $400 watches were, you know.
There was something like kind of, I mean, like this Seiko Monster, there's something almost, I don't want to say cheap, but it's like, there's like a humbleness like to it. It's like, it doesn't feel like a premium thing. Like, it just doesn't feel like a luxury watch. And, you know, like I reviewed a more modern version of the Seiko Monster, a number of years ago now, but I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And, you know, one of my takeaways from that watch, which I owned, was that it was just like, it was a more, it's just like a more refined thing. And as brands get more refined, they position themselves to you know, to a client, to a market that has a little bit more money to spend. I think sometimes they, like the watches just kind of like lose some of that charm, you know, for being sort of like unassuming, you know, like mass produced things that are still also like really nice looking and well considered. And, you know, that's, you know, I would much rather, you know, wear this like, you know, early version of the Monster than, you know, like a more modern one. And I do like, I don't own that modern one
Same
anymore.
I love my SKX. I have the 013, which is the little mid-size version. And I don't really care for the Seiko 5s. They've lost some of that charm to me. I don't like the Seiko 5 logo a lot, first of all, but there is something so charming about that watch, and it is like every time I see it on someone else, I want to wear it. I want to wear mine. I want to go get it out and put it on. There's a charm to it, and I actually haven't. These SNKs, I can't tell you the last time I actually saw one of these. I don't have mine anymore, but I gave them away to like brothers or something. But Zach, do you still have yours? Your little SNK?
I have 3. I had like 4 of them. I had cream, blue, black, and green. Somebody bought the green one off of me at a wind-up years ago.
That's wow.
Funny story. The cream one's in my desk. It's broken. It like took a hard fall at some point. And the black and the blue one are around somewhere. I honestly don't wear them very much, but they're cool. They're very cool.
Based the like the worn and wound 10-year LE on the SNK that we did, which is a little bigger and really cool. And I finally got one. One was found in the shop at one point. I finally was able to pick one up, and I love it. But I think like, I don't know. There's just so much charm to those old Seikos, and I'm trying to really think back, because there were so many other brands at the time that I really got into. And Zach, you were saying like these foreign brands, and
I have like ones that jump to mind, and I think they'll probably come up later. Like Orient was another really big one at the time.
Bambino.
Christopher Ward obviously was around back then and they were much more like, they were more affordable at that time. Like they were really trying to be very, very value focused there. But then there's weird ones, and I'm messing up the names. You know, with the Maritech Pilot, as silly as it was, there was like 2 of those, the mid and the large, and like that was like a year's worth of content right there. It's like that was the best thing ever for a while. You know, all these things that were before like the Miyota 9000 series came out and stuff like that. Techne, you remember? That was the first Seiko Mecha Quartz chronograph, I think, on the market, at least. Was
I don't remember that one.
Yeah, Techne.
So these brands, I mean, Seiko and some of these other brands we're discussing, have kind of been a little, you know, like obviously Seiko hasn't been lost to time. Like Seiko's still a very important brand, but you know, they have, I think, sort of left a left a void in that, that sub $500 kind of like enthusiast space. One of the things that has sort of come up, and I see it in my Instagram DMs, I see it in our friend Mike Razak's article on a blog twatch that we'll link to. He DM'd me and said I inspired him to write this piece that he wrote on Seiko, just landed today in a blog to watch that kind of discusses how like the move up market essentially left a void for micro brands, to fill. And so I wanted to ask you guys, is it that simple? Like, is it as simple as Seiko just kind of like increasing their prices, wanting to like have a more, I guess, like a more premium product to sell? Does that fully explain sort of like what's happened with that budget scene, either with Seiko or with the community at large, or is it more complex than that?
I think it's more complex than that. I mean, I think it's certainly part of it, as we just talked about. And I wanted to write an article, like mostly because I had the title in my head, like Seiko, I love you, but you're bringing me down. But it was, it's just like, because we hadn't, like, the SPB 149, the 62 MOSFET issue, which I have that one. When that came out, and that was $1,000 or whatever, that was absolutely huge. I mean, there's a while where those $1,000 to $1,400 Seikos were absolutely the number one thing. Like they were rad. I think what happened is they sort of ran out of, I don't want to say they ran out of ideas, but it feels a little bit like they ran out of ideas. They went back to the vintage book, and
there's only so many.
There's only so many that are really iconic. I mean, there's a few they haven't done, like weird ones from the 80s, like the ashtray and shit like that, stuff like that. That would be cool. But yeah, it felt like they kind of like milked that, and then that sort of ran out of steam. And like the weird, funky things that once upon a time were like whatever idea created the monster, that seems to have sort of left the picture. So I feel like, they I don't know, they kind of, I don't know what you call it, like I don't know, they stuck themselves into a spot. They put themselves in a corner with that. And then the other thing, and I feel like I talk about this sometimes like on a weekend watches and stuff, is that I don't think that they compare now at the price point with the specs they have, which is a problem. So like, everyone knows they're good watches, and like they generally keep really good time, but their spec range is like plus 20, minus 20, plus 40. They're like, they have a huge range, which is just, you can get chronometers at that point by Solita and Etta, and it's just, and now Le Joux Perret. So that's really hard, I think.
I do think the surface of like the micro brands, independent brands, I don't want to offend anybody, but they've brought a new sense of creativity to the space, and they spec these watches better than what Seiko's offering, or what some of these other maybe lower end brands were offering, at close to the same price range. So I think people just took notice of that, and people spent their money buying more independent or micro brands. We've seen it. We look how much the wind up fair has grown, and how many people are interested in brands that aren't Seiko or Hamilton or the Swatch Group brands. And I think it has made a huge impact. I think these other brands have made a huge impact on the industry, and why people aren't spending the money, like $300, $400 buying a Seiko, when they could get something different that's a little better.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to spend like $300 to $500 on a Seiko sports watch, you're looking at a Seiko 5 Sports, which, whether it's fair or not, like if you start looking up reviews of those watches or commentary on those watches on the internet, or if you go to Instagram and start looking for information on those watches, like the line on those watches is that they are like inferior to what came before. That they're, they don't have screw down crowns. They're not like a true quote unquote diver's watch. They're sort of like a fashion watch play on a tool watch, format that came before. And I feel like if you start like looking at those as an outsider, like your mind is like poisoned against them, like almost instantly.
That sets up this notion that those are things that really cost more too.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like a screw down crown, that's just a choice. for them, which does make it a little hard to kind of stomach that they really did strip out the tool aspect of them, charge, to make it seem like that's why they cost less, right? They're like, oh well, once you go above 500, then you can get into real dive territory, because that's what it costs to get a diver. But
yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, Kat, do you have any thoughts, positive or otherwise, on the Seiko 5 Sports conundrum? Like, I feel like this is I remember when they came out, and it was a big deal, and we covered them like very closely on Worn and Wound. We had like a lengthy introduction piece, and like I think multiple reviews of the different lines that came out in that first year that Seiko 5 Sports was sort of like relaunched. And it kind of seems like, if it wasn't a failure, it doesn't seem like enthusiasts have glommed onto these watches in the way that Seiko would have hoped. Do you agree with that, Kat?
Yeah, I agree. I think they're popular. I think that we sell them in the shop, and they tend to sell. But I think amongst like the larger enthusiast community, I think a lot of people were disappointed that several features got pulled away. I know I was one of them. I loved the SKX series, and I just feel like you're getting less than for more money, which doesn't really make sense to me.
The GMTs are the only ones that I think maybe stand out, because that just wasn't a thing you could get for a while. But otherwise,
they really went. Like they really turned like the dial variants up to 11 too. Like they really wanted to give us textures and colors and things that I don't know, maybe we just I don't know, I don't know if I really needed that avocado dial, or whatever that was often discussed with the weird texture. Is that what enthusiasts wanted, or did enthusiasts want an ISO certified dive watch, with a
well, it's very clear to me too, based on their marketing for Seiko 5s. If you look at their Instagram page, it's all very, very young people. They are marketing these watches to people in high school and college. There's not, I don't know. There's not very many photos of anyone that's over the age of 30 on their marketing. So I think that they are, doing these colorful dials and kind of graffiti stuff, and they're just really trying to market it to a younger crowd, which makes sense. And maybe someone that doesn't know what a screw down crown is and doesn't really care about it being ISO certified and all that other stuff. So I get it, but at the same time, it's kind of sad, because it's that's what brought me into this hobby, is literally Seiko is what brought me down the rabbit hole of being here. So you kind of lose some of that. Or something else I was going to say and I forgot. So I'll probably think of it here in a second.
Yeah, actually,
I had another point, but
just the other day, my mom wanted to get a watch for my nephew, who's just graduated from high school, and he doesn't know anything about watches or whatever. She's like, it's a graduation gift. It's like it is a prototypical graduation gift. So she had a certain amount of money, it was around $250 she wants to spend. So I was giving her suggestions, whatever, and putting it, we ended up going with a G-Shock, a metal. It's the GBM 2100. I don't know how to describe it very well, but it's sort of part of the Geoke kind of style. Solar though, rubber strap, metal belt, and it's just it's a very handsome watch. It's very tough. It's got all these it's so loaded up in features, and it was kind of hard. It's so you can get this one, which is very, very basic mechanical watch, or this multi-tool of a crazy thing, and it's just I don't know. It won out, and I agree. I feel for this specific kid, it was just I think he probably would appreciate this G-Shock that he can't mess up at all, and doesn't really have to worry about setting and everything. So.
Yeah. So I think probably that's a good segue to the next, kind of point that we should discuss, which is what does budget, what does value mean? And to a certain customer, it means a watch that has that's just the kind of there for you and reliable, and you don't really have to think too much about, and and for an enthusiast customer it means something else. So before we talk about where the value and the budget watches are now, what some good choices are in that $500 range, we should probably kind of define our terms and what budget actually means, if it does in fact mean a Habring Joseph, or if there's a more narrow definition of what budget means. So Kat, when you think of like a budget watch, if someone asks you for your recommendation for a budget watch, what do you start thinking of? Do you start thinking about like watches under a certain price point? Do you think of watches in a certain category?
Yeah, I think first I immediately go to anything like sub 1,000. I don't think I think first sub 500, even though that really truly probably should be budget. But I think you could buy a really solid, you could buy a really solid watch under $500, and we're going to talk about some of them, but you could buy something that would like really make you happy for a long time under $1,000 for sure. And I think like if someone could stretch their budget a little bit, like that's what I would do. Instead of capping it at like $500. But I think anywhere from 500 to 1,000, like there's some fantastic choices. But that's what comes to mind first for me is just sub $1,000 in any style. And I think you have a wide array of watches available under that price point.
Yeah. Zach, what about you? What do you think? When you think of the term budget watch, what sort of springs to mind?
It's funny. I feel like budget isn't actually a word like we use too often, because I feel like it can have like negative connotations to it. It's like, but like more like the value, like accessible kind of like things. Because like, so yeah, when I think of a budget, that makes me think of a little bit more of like not as good of a watch. Like you're really looking for like as a basic or even the cheapest version of a thing. Yeah. So a knockoff or something like that. That's just like, if I'm like really thinking about the word budget, like how I react to it. But in terms of like a good value, like, value ratio at a certain price point. I think it's swung back to quartz now to a large extent. And I think you're going to look at Citizen and Echo Drive stuff, Timex, obviously. There's all that sorts of digital, and Swatch again, potentially, just it's kind of the classics of that, that price point. Because the other thing that we haven't really gotten to, and it's which, a bigger concept, but like the limit on the micro brands is also their scale, right? So like Seikos and Timexes are making hundreds of thousands of watches. So like their prices are totally different. They also have retail margins. So at a certain point, a micro brand can't quite, compete. That said, just popped in my head, but that brand Sheffield out of the UK that just made that watch with Jay Leno, their watches are like $100. I don't know how they make them. Maybe they're just losing money and doing this for fun or something. But like, there are brands out there that are making like incredibly inexpensive things that look like more expensive things,
Yeah.
But yeah, I just as a matter of a point of reference, the Habring is 2% of the price of another watch that came out last week, the Urban Jurgensen. So hey, 2%.
Yeah, I mean,
what a deal!
Just as I think we can let's diverge just for a second and talk about the Urban Jurgensen. And one thing that I was glad to see in the coverage of Urban Jurgensen is I didn't clock anybody trying to say that these watches, which start over six figures, are a good value. And that was refreshing. Like everyone like agreed that they're like incredibly expensive. And like whether you like them or not, whether you think they're nice designs or not, I didn't see that thing that like makes so many people in and outside of the watch community cringe is when you try to like take a very expensive thing and say like, actually it's a good value. Actually, there's a lot of there's a real like value proposition in this 150,000 euro watch. So I just wanted like just wanted to mention that. I thought that was like a positive thing that came out of that coverage last week. Of those very,
I feel like that
also very expensive
was
watches.
Back in the early days of Worn and Wound. I feel like that was the topic of a lot of articles, like the value proposition. I feel like we have gotten away from that in a way, because watches are just much more expensive now in general. And like, yeah, it's just interesting to think about, because I do remember specifically searching for articles of watches that were like, you can't afford this. This is another good alternative. And it's kind of harder to do that now, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still obviously affordable alternatives to the bigger brands, but
what is the affordable alternative to the Urban Jurgensen that just came out last week? might be too early to tell.
Roger Smith. I don't know, like,
Yeah.
It's a joke, guys. To the internet, people listening, we're smiling and laughing at that instead.
So what are some with in the current scene, like what in your guys' opinion are some like standouts today in terms of like, whether you use the term value or budget, we can kind of like, group those together. Like where does your recommendation go? Like, do you go to micro brands first, or do you try to like, do you still pull out like do you still play the Seiko card when you're making that recommendation to someone?
I think I play favorites of just things that I particularly like, and if I had $500 to spend, what I would go buy. I think Citizen has really filled a lot of that gap from what Seiko used to be, and that's where the ProMaster Aqualand, for instance, that's under $500 and like 100% really cool diver right there, with history and just like cool functions. The Ciosa, I think, is also really cool. Not all of them are under 500, but there's several that are, and I think they've done some really beautiful dials, and I've been very impressed with that line. So yeah, for me, I think Citizen holds a lot, and yeah, you could go Hamilton too. I think with maybe the quartz. I haven't actually priced these out. I don't think the mechanicals are under 500 anymore. I think they're over that. Yeah, but the quartz I think are under 500.
I really think that illustrates that like that $500 figure, which is like totally arbitrary. It's like it's really no longer relevant. I think like $1,000 is like is truly like the new number, and we just kind of have to accept that like
things are working.
Like while there are like good watches that you can get under $1,000, like it's it's less meaningful today than
if someone came to me and was like, Kat, I have $200, what do I buy? Just go buy G-Shock. Like literally, that's what I would tell someone. Just go buy G-Shock. I wouldn't even try to find something that fits within a $200 cap, because I just think it'll be really hard to be really happy with what you're going to spend that money on, versus like getting something that is probably going to last you forever and be very tough. It's hard to beat a G-Shock in that way.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned Citizen too, because that's another thing that I sort of found in some of the like conversations I was having after that article, came out, is that like Citizen's offerings in that, like kind of like sub $1,000 space, like they're really they've like sort of like taken over that space from Seiko, when they went a little bit more up market, and like they have watches that are, like they might not be as inexpensive as like, the SKX was back in the day, but when you factor in, like inflation of everything else, like it's like somewhat comparable. And, they just have have enthusiast driven options that they didn't when the Seiko, when the SKX was sort of like the king. And Zach, that's something I think you can speak to too, right? Like the, Citizen was not as important to Worn and Wound, 10 years ago, as it was today, in terms of like the editorial coverage, at least.
No, definitely not. I feel like the sport watch offerings that they have now really were few and far between. Like there was like the Echozilla or something, which people like, there were a couple of like cult ones, but they weren't a lot. There weren't many. The one though that stands out, is it the Nighthawk? Was it the
yeah,
and that was like a video when we put that up, like that was our like first like hit video kind of a thing. Like it did super well back in the day. Nobody was really talking about, people were talking about it, but nobody had done like a video review of it kind of thing. I also attempted to make a video explaining how the slide rule works, which I don't think that video might have come down since, but that was like a super cool watch. It's so feature packed. But yeah, no, I mean, totally, Zach. It's just, they weren't, I don't know. But just to answer, I think also Timex is worth looking at now, that in a way that they weren't necessarily back then as much as of an enthusiast brand. Like, I definitely had a lot of Timexes, and I had Timexes when we first, started Worn and Wound, and I was still getting them. But, obviously they weren't doing anything mechanical, and they didn't until they came out with, whatever that little hand wound thing was called.
Marlin, right?
Marlin. Yeah, I was thinking Maverick, but the Marlin, which was like a game changer for Timex and the enthusiast audience. But now they have dive watches, they have mechanical field watches, and they're pretty reasonably priced. I don't have like their site open right now, but I'm guessing they're mostly under 500.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think the Marlin and the Q for them really like took them off in a new direction in popularity.
The thing that's just funny, like even having this conversation, is like, you know, when we started Worn Around, the conversation, sure, there were quartz watches, but it was like, what are the mechanical watches we can get? Because quartz was not what anybody wanted, really. You know, so it was really about how, like, what are the most affordable mechanical watches, and that's really moved away. And I mean, in Timex, you know, they're making mechanical watches, but they're using Citizen movements in most of them, or Seagull movements. So, you know, it all comes back to a couple of companies still.
Seiko included. I mean, Brew came up earlier, and you know, we mentioned like Brew as an alternative to Seiko, like filling the void that Seiko left. But some brews are Seikos, you know, in a way. Like they use, you know, some of them use Seiko movements. So that's another factor here, is like, even as we, you know, our perception of Seiko kind of having like left the enthusiast market, either, you know, by choice or by the interests of the enthusiasts, just sort of, you know, like they really haven't gone away, you know, in that sense, because so many small brands are using their, you know, their off the shelf movements still. So.
With field watches, you know, I think there's a value to wanting to have a Hamilton. Like Hamilton is a brand name with a lot of cachet, especially when you're like getting like a watch early on. I feel like it's cool to have a Hamilton field watch. But field watches, if you're looking for a quartz field watch, like, my goodness, do you have options these days?
Yeah,
you know,
Marathon comes to mind,
Vare comes to mind too. Their dive watches are also pretty nice, and Precitus, you know, who do stuff made like some of like veterans. Like, affordable quartz field watches are not hard to come by.
What's the brand, Zach, that they only do field watches, and they made that one with the loomed case?
Oh gosh,
on the tip of my tongue.
Starts with a B.
Bertucci,
yes,
and they've been around forever.
They're very, very old school. I'm a fan of theirs. I have that loom case field watch. It needs a battery. Cool. But it's really cool. One of my proudest Instagram moments is when IWC released their like, you know, their concept full loom case. You know, watch that, you know, of course you can't buy. And, you know, if they ever put it into production, I'm sure it would cost, you know, like, you know, 5 figures for sure. I pulled out that Bertucci and loomed it up and took a picture, and my caption was, "Not a concept. It's right there. You can you can have it." Mine needs a battery, but that's okay. Let's talk about that, like, you know, that like truly affordable segment, like $500. I asked you guys to come up with a, you know, just like a couple of picks, you know, that are kind of like filling that value void. When people say like, why, you know, where have all the budget watches gone, value driven watches gone? You know, let's think of a handful that prove that they're still out there. I asked for $500, but like, honestly, like, if you're under $1,000, I think like we're in good shape. Kat, do you have a pick or two that you want?
I mean, my go-to list would literally be like, look at Brew, look at Laurier, look at Notice. Like, those 3 brands give you something very different each. And like, if you want a really cool diver that's specced out, Notice has got some great ones. If you want vintage inspired, Laurier. If you want something that's a more racing, modern, but also like, I those are like the top 3 I would immediately just go to if I was buying a budget watch right now.
Yeah. Honestly, like, Laurier was on my list too. Like, they're a go-to for me. Laurier Falcon is $499. Like, it's hard to think of a like a more sort of like, I don't know, sort of like classically inspired, you know, just like a watch that looks like a watch that you can wear forever. That's like super affordable.
And that's with a bracelet, and like a very nice bracelet too. Like, you know,
Laurier does a great job with these. The other thing that I've recommended these before, and I'll recommend them again today, is Swatch watches, but not moon swatches. Like, like, go into the back of the Swatch store and like look at their art watches, look at their, like, you know, pop culture watches, look at the like the What If series. Like, these watches cost like between like $100 and $300, and like they have sales sometimes, and like there are like really like truly creative things happening, you know, with Swatch. That's a lot of fun, beyond just, you know, like the moon swatch, which is, you know, it's an homage watch, basically, which is a term that like watch brands hate. But yeah, it's not actually very creative. It's kind of a boring watch from a brand that is like known for doing things that are like specifically like not boring at all. So
Yeah.
look, swatch, but not moon swatch. Look beyond that. Is another recommendation I have. Zach, how about you? Any favorites in that sort of like $500 or under $1,000 price range?
I mean, I definitely had all the brands we've already
Yeah.
listed. And I was like thinking, like, why am I immediately just going to these same brands? I mean, some like, we all like know Jonathan, we all know Lorenzo, and it's like, so part of me is like, I was just like some sort of bias because these are people I know, but then I started digging a little bit, and like they really are great examples. It's not just because they're our friends. Nevada, mostly over, I mean, they're a lot under 1,000, mostly over 500. They currently have their Chronosport Mecha Quartz, which is like, you could hammer nails with that thing. It's a cool looking watch. I did have the Seiko 5 GMT on there because the Robbie, I don't know if they call it that yet, but the one that he wore is pretty great. Mr. Jones watches, sort of similar to Swatch.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
A lot of fun there if you want something personality, and they're like they're beautiful too. They're inexpensive, but those dials are extremely well executed, which is nice. And then the Bambino is still like $250.
Like, is it still being made? I didn't even know that. Okay,
there are more Bambinos than I knew existed. Like if you go, there's Bambinos. Solar Bambinos and Bambinos with different complications in them, and
there's solar Bambinos.
There's a solar Bambino, just in case you needed that. And they're like $400 something, but then they're on sale for $240, something like that. So that was always the way. I looked at my review of it back in the day. It was $180 with a coupon. And I used to get, when you buy like a watch, like you buy 2 watches from Orient, which had coupons, that'd be like $275 together. You'd get a free watch.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Man. Orient was like so much fun back in the day. Yeah.
There's another brand that does that famously, which begins with an I and ends with a
Icon.
Victa, which you buy one, you end up with like 8 or something.
Yeah.
That brand is not going to be recommended on this podcast, but
no.
Lastly, before we cut off the conversation, I think it's worth just sort of like addressing like the non-budget, the non-value side, of the equation here, or just like like the quote unquote luxury watch, industry. Like, are we at a point, do you think, where consumers are like ready to, like, I don't know if like revolt is the right word, but it seems like people are like really angry with the
prices,
with rising prices. Yeah.
I mean, have you tried buying a car lately? It's crazy. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
I'm driving my car into the ground.
There's vehicles that are like down payments on houses, and that's just like a normal like truck or SUV. It's absolutely crazy. I don't know. There needs to be a revolt because I feel like we've all just gotten so used to everything being very expensive, but it's gotten out of hand for sure.
I mean, it seems like people are buying fewer watches. Like the numbers would seem to indicate that like imports are down, and like interest in like that sort of like entry level to like mid-tier luxury space is declining. People are buying more pre-owned watches. Like Zach, you're long on record as being like a fan of like the pre-owned market and finding value there. But
I almost buy nothing new. I mean, this Hybring is pre-owned. I thought about buying it new, but I mean the price, it's an expensive watch, and a wait period. We're just like, I'm just not in the mood for that right now. So, but it's always done well for me. And I mean, we all know also, you buy a watch, it's going to depreciate in value. So if you don't mind a scratch or two, or I mean, I've been very lucky too. I mean, this watch was mint. My Ming was mint. Like, you save a bit. But I also wonder, like, with the price thing, and it is, and I'll admit, like, my perception has been skewed because I can afford more different watches than I could back 10, 15 years ago, especially. But like, my feeling on the price of, the smaller independent brands that we look at that are more expensive, Ming's and Hybring, good example, versus the Omegas and the Tudors and the whatever. Like, it's different. Like when I see their prices go up, like a major Swiss brand, I think it's nefarious. When I see a price go up of a brand like these other brands, I think it's cost of goods going up, you know, generally speaking. And also,
potentially they're offering something of value for that money too, you know, that like something more than like the previous version of the watch. Like the thing that drives me crazy is the prices of the Omegas and the IWCs and like, you know, pick your brand, like those prices keep rising, but you're not getting, you know, like an increase in, you know, like the product is not getting like, you know, 5% better or 10% better to correspond, you know, with the price, which I think is the thing that like really drives a lot of, you know, would be customers insane, is that, you know, sometimes they get worse, you know, because these brands are, you know, part of big corporations who are, you know, interested in cutting costs, not putting more work into things to make things make things more expensive typically. So yeah,
totally.
I don't know. I just like, I think that, you know, for a long time I've sort of, you know, looked at pricing as like, you know, these things are not, you know, they're inessential, like they're luxury items. Price is sort of like, you know, irrelevant anyway. And I would go to Watches and Wonders and see these, you know, new things, and like the price would be like, oh, but you know, it's this $50,000 watch, an $80,000 watch, whatever. And I wouldn't really think too much of it, but like it seems like now we're at, like there's a tipping point where like you kind of have to think about it, because like the floor is also rising. You know, it's not just the high end. It's just everything's just being pushed more and more out of reach. So it's a problem the watch industry will have to address in some way, but I don't really know what the workaround is.
Yeah.
Just make really expensive watches and sell to that. I don't know how many people it is in the world, like that 1% of the 1% that are infinitely wealthy and bored, I guess.
Maybe Seiko has a new window to come back and you know, create something really special in that, like, you know, sub $1,000 price point. Remind us all of what value really is. Maybe.
It's also, you know, when we're looking at it, but then it's also like Grand Seiko opposite seems to be doing extremely well. Prices are going up, but like where Seiko's kind of fallen behind, it seems like Grand Seiko has accelerated in a lot of ways. And yes, their prices are going up, but like there's still a comparative value to be had there. You know, I don't know really what my point was there. I don't know, other than like Grand Seiko's cool. I don't know. No, but like, I don't know. It's fun thinking about the prices, especially the ultra high end, because, you know, not to like just throw Urban Jurgensen under the bus or anything like that. It's just that it's like the most recent example, and one of those watches is $450,000, you know, dollars. It's such a black box, right? Like, why is that so much more than a Kari Voutilanen watch, right? Who is kind of one of the people behind this brand? You know, like at what like where are these costs coming from at a certain point? Maybe they're nowhere. Maybe they're just saying the only person we want to buy this watch is somebody who can afford a $450,000 thing. You know. Oh well, not us.
Hey, listen, speak for yourself. I you know, just kidding. I'm definitely not. My Bitcoin portfolio is not doing quite as well as I would have hoped. Maybe if I'll forget it. It's not going to happen. Yeah.
Got my Mega Millions tickets. No.
Yeah. Really. Well, thanks, guys. It's been a fun conversation. I think that, you know, it's one that we'll continue to return to, this idea of what value means, something we talk about all the time on the website, in our reviews, and in our Instagram DMs as well. I'm sure we've all had those conversations. So, thanks again for coming on. Listeners, if you have favorite budget watches, let us know. You know, send us DMs, you know, or jump on the Warner Wound Plus Slack channel, and tell us your thoughts on this topic. We'd love to hear them. Thank you all for tuning in once again for another week of the Warner Wound podcast. We always appreciate it, and we'll see you again next week. Until then, take care.